This is Adina Blaustein, Content Production Manager at Aleph Beta. We're all still reeling at the images of the brutal attack on Israel and what it means to see the worst side of humanity. But over the past few weeks, we've also seen some beautiful moments of kindness and community. In our third podcast episode about the war in Israel, Imu and Rabbi Fohrman sit down once again to share more heartwarming stories and reflect on the troubling questions they've been grappling with. Here they are.
We're back in week 3 of what feels like an alternate universe. Imu, how you been making out this week?
I don't even know how to answer that question. But yeah, I didn't expect for us to be recording a bunch of these emergency podcasts, but who knows? The world is very uncertain. A few of our listeners have written in saying that these podcasts help. And since I'm feeling particularly helpless, somebody saying that something that I'm doing is mildly useful motivates us to record more podcasts.
We'll continue with that. Yeah, so I'm still here in Israel, and I thought I'd report to you a little bit about what's going on over here in my life. We're here in the Leonardo Plaza. I think I must have mentioned last week that through the efforts of 2 philanthropists, and these efforts are now ongoing, the hotel is full with hundreds of people who have been taken from Kfar Maimon, which is one of the yeshuvim in the south that was mandatorily evacuated. For the most part, the folks in Kfar Maimon survived without terrible injury. And one of the things I learned this week is how that came to be, because they're sandwiched by yeshuvim that really got hit badly. Be'eri, which scores and scores of people were killed, is right next to them. And I happened to meet and was chatting with some of the people here, a man by the name of Guy, who's a lawyer. His wife, Naama, works in high tech. They're up here, and they actually told me the story over Shabbos. And I kind of wanted to tell it to you. Pretty remarkable story. Basically, what happened was that early Shabbat morning on Simchat Torah, they had this just incredible spread of rockets that were being fired. And the Rav of the Shechuna, I believe his name is Rav Edry, basically told everybody to go home, do not stay in shul, go home, take shelter, and turn on the radio. And so that's what they did. And that's when they learned that not only were there rockets coming, but there were actually terrorists that were infiltrating these communities. Now, at the time, they did not know how many terrorists there were. They thought it was a few dozen. Nobody understood that it wasn't a few dozen. It was more than 2,000 at the time. It was literally an invasion. But be that as it may, they weren't in a position to defend themselves. Every yeshuv has basically some sort of volunteer guard of folks from the yeshuv that take turns guarding, but they had been actually disarmed. There was some concern about mistaking hostiles or something, so Tzahal temporarily took away their rifles. Basically, they had no guns. So Guy basically told his family, he had 4 boys and I think a daughter and his wife, and he told his 4 boys that, okay, it's kind of up to us. The plan is going to be, if terrorists come in the house, we hold them off at the main door. And he took his boys into the kitchen and told them to get out the longest knives that they had and to just literally station themselves inside of the door. They thought if there was 1 or maybe 2 terrorists that came in, even if they came in with guns, maybe they had a chance to survive with knives. And that his wife and daughter would use the chance to be able to try to escape through the back door. That was kind of their plan. So they stationed themselves by the door to do just that. Now, meanwhile, word was coming in from other folks in the yeshuv that a band of terrorists was gathering outside the gates of the yeshuv and getting ready to blast their way in. By their count, there were 40 of them, 40 heavily armed terrorists that basically would have had their way with the entire yeshuv that didn't have any guns. There was 1 pistol that his friend had he was kind of trying to stand guard outside of his house. At that point, they made an emergency call to the army and said, we have 40 terrorists outside our gates. We really need some backup, and we need it now. And the word they got from Tzahal was, we have no one to send you. the available units in Sahel were already in pitched battle and defending Be'eri, which was the yishuv right next door, the kibbutz right next door. And there was no one to send. They were on their own. At that point, a helicopter passed overhead, an army helicopter flying low on its way to Be'eri. Mm-hmm. The terrorists that were massed at the gate saw the helicopter flying low and sensed an opportunity. One of them lifted up his shoulder-fired missile and launched an anti-tank missile at the helicopter, hit the helicopter, brought the helicopter down. The helicopter crashes to the ground but does not explode. Doors open, 25 Sahel soldiers come pouring out of the helicopter, immediately take up positions. The helicopter explodes, and they see that there's these 40 terrorists there. Wow. And they get into a pitched gun battle with them that lasts over 4 hours. And in that gun battle, they eliminated all 40 terrorists with no casualties to Tzahal. And that's why this guy and his wife were there to tell the story to me. If it weren't for that.
Oh, that's wild.
He said none of us would be in this hotel.
That's crazy. So there's this army from the heavens, essentially. They called Tzahal asking for help. And Tzahal says, no, sorry, we can't do that. But there was an army in the heavens that was brought down. Wow. That is a remarkable story.
Imagine being on board that helicopter and getting hit with an anti-tank missile, right? And you think, like, this is it. We're all going to die. This is the worst thing that could possibly happen to you. And in fact, it's only that brings you down, right, safely in the place that you really need to be to save an entire town. After Shabbos, I got to see some pictures of the burnt-out helicopter. It was a pretty exploded helicopter.
Wow.
Anyway, it was a remarkable story. So these are the guys here, and I've gotten to know some of them, and I want to tell you some stories about that. First of all, Saturday night, performers are coming from all over the place. And this past Motzei Shabbat, Yishai Ribo came, and we had a little intimate Yishai Ribo concert.
Performer, you're getting a lot of great benefits. Are you also, you get to wear all the socks that we send to the soldiers?
Exactly. The real reason I'm here is I'm just soaking up all the perks we give to the people from the South. Anyway, so right before the Yishai Ribo concert, everyone breaks into song, but it's not a Yishai Ribo song. They're just singing Kol Sason V'Kol Simcha, and the whole community is really getting into it. And they're all dancing, so, like, I'll dance with them. I didn't know what was going on. And there's this big table set. It looked like it was a Malava Malka. Turns out it was a Sheva Brachos. So it's like, okay, I'll dance for Sheva Brachos. And then one of my friends who I got to meet here explained afterwards, after I was finished dancing, what the story behind the Sheva Brachos was. Turns out that Shabbat morning on Simchat Torah, there was a call that went out. A commander in the army reached out to one of his soldiers who was in Kfar Maimon, boy who wasn't in Kfar Maimon, who was in, I think it was Yerushalayim, and said, we're getting besieged here. We really need help. And he got into a car and started driving south with his gun to see what he could do. On the road, he was shot and killed by terrorists on the road. And he never got there. And his brother in Kfar Maimon was due to be married 9 days from them. And on the day that he got up from Shiva was his wedding, his already scheduled wedding. And that was his wedding. And this was the last of the Sheva Bracha from that wedding. And, you know, you're dancing with this chassan, but, you know, he's really going from just, well, the worst of times to a kind of the best of times. And, you know, I don't know. There's something about these.
I imagine you wouldn't want to let go. Like, you'd want to dance forever. You don't want to leave the cocoon of the Sheva Brachos.
And all the Sheva Brachos I'm into, you know, people sort of, I don't know, they never really get into the songs as much as they were really getting into the songs. Somehow the songs really reverberated. And of course, you know, those songs are really songs about the rejuvenation of Israel and of God rejoicing with us. Yasis alayich elokayich kimsas chatan al kala. And that somehow using the joy of a man finding his bride as a metaphor for the kind of joy that God can experience with reference to us in bringing us back and having us, flourish on the land. So given the circumstances, those had, a special meaning.
That song of Odi Shama, the idea that like we've been through so much suffering as a people, the idea that there's this promise that, once again we'll be heard, the voices of joy and gladness, right? Like it seems now so just like it's not possible. It's not possible for us to go back to the way things were, or for there to be joy again. And there's this promise that those sounds of happiness will come back again. I guess the juxtaposition, like when someone tells me that, like it'll be happy again, good times are coming again, I'm thinking, in a few months, in a year, in, like in the future. But within the depths of war and despair, and while hostages are away, for there to be weddings, for there to be occasions of happiness, there's so much complexity of emotion and difficulty there. Right? I find myself just always confused about what to feel and think in every moment, right? Just like, even now, like, I don't know, we laughed earlier in this podcast. I'm like, I don't know, like we should cut that. We shouldn't have laughter in a podcast episode. Or I don't know, even moral questions. There's moral ambiguity for me. Like I've been struggling with a lot of different feelings.
Yeah, I have too. One of the words going around is moral clarity. There is a certain kind of moral clarity that comes when you're attacked in such a ruthless and barbaric way. But somehow there's this weird mix of moral clarity on the one hand, but, I don't know, just a sense of, a general sense of confusion, I suppose, in a lot of other feelings. We don't get exposed to emotions this raw so often, and processing them, dealing with them, like my kids were pretty secure, but I've had kids that have woken up with nightmares that called me, and it's scary, confusing, chaotic stuff. And I want to talk to you about some of that in a minute. I'll tell you one or two more stories, and then we can maybe turn to some of that, those confusing things.
Your stories I always find helpful.
So we had my daughter over for Shabbos, and she shared a story. She was going shopping in Ramat Eshkol, one of the neighborhoods over there. Turns out there was a woman who was collecting foodstuffs in the makolet for the poor, just for the poor of the town. She was asking people, could you donate some cans? Could you donate some various things? So she asked Shalva, could you donate something? I'm collecting for the poor. And Shalva's immediate response is, what do you mean you're collecting for the poor? It's like, right, in a time like this, people are collecting maybe for the soldiers, right? I hear that. Maybe you're collecting from the people from the South that don't have anything because they were uprooted, but just collecting for the poor of the town, it just seemed like a strange, so it almost seemed like it was off. Like it didn't have to do with the times. It was like this shred of normalcy from times past. But she said, you know what, fine, I'm going to do that. So she goes and she buys a chicken, and she goes to the front of the makolet, pays for the chicken, and she comes back to the lady and gives her the chicken. The lady's so happy that she got that chicken, and she's talking to Shalva, and Shalva's chatting with her, and the lady says, I don't know if you know who I am, but she then revealed who she was. She was the mother of one of the kidnapped children.
Oh my God.
And she said, I couldn't just stay home and just be in my own world with my own thoughts and just focused on my own child and everything. I had to get out of myself and see if I could just do something for someone else. So I'm collecting for the poor people around here. That's how I'm getting out of myself. And that's what she was doing. That's what she was there for.
These stories are almost unbelievable. I find it weirdly comforting because, right, like, I don't know what your experience has been, but like the vortex of emotions that I feel, and you're in yourself and in your pain, and it just spirals. It's almost like your emotions collapse in on themselves, and that's me. I'm no one in this, right? So a person whose child is missing, for them to say, I can't, it's almost like I can't dwell within my own self. I need to go out.
To me, it really gets to something we were talking about, I think, a couple weeks ago, which is that the natural emotion is this rage. But the thing with rage is, either it expresses itself outwardly, which can be problematic, or it just is this tunnel inside of yourself that you just live in, and it draws you in, and you just brood and get angry, and that's no good. And then it feels like, what's the word for it? Righteous indignation, righteous rage, purple rage. The problem with rage is that it's paired with righteousness, right? Which makes you think like, how could I ever let go of that? And it's such a dangerous emotion to just dwell on and just be sort of consumed by righteous rage. But to me, a story like this is inspiring because it's like, okay, if anybody has a right to be consumed by righteous rage, it's this lady. And she's trying to get out of that whirlpool. And it's not like she's forgetting about her kid, but somehow I've got to break free of that. And maybe the energy of breaking free of that and just contributing to the general sense of achdut and sense of oneness in the community can be something that redounds in some special way for the benefit of the kidnapped children in general, maybe her child too.
Now, you were talking to me about this notion of the individual versus the collective. Of who are you in this? Or do you see yourself as an individual, or do you see yourself as part of the larger body of a nation? One of the stories that keeps coming to mind over and over for me, and I don't even know what to make of it, but like just the verse in Malachim, in Kings, of the Isha Shunamit, who says, B'toch ami ani yoshavet.
Interesting.
That I dwell. That's right. Like I dwell amongst my nation.
Well, this is the moment when the prophet comes to her and is very impressed with her actions and says, "What can I do for you?" And she's like,
"What can I do for you?
Nothing.
Can I speak to the king?" Right?
Can I speak to the king? Yeah. Right? And he's like offering to do something really nice for her, and to single her out to be treated differently than everyone else. And she's like, "No, I'm perfectly happy being part of the community." B'toch ami ani yoshavet. And then later on, when the prophet insists on doing something for her, and she has this child that is this miracle child, and then the child dies, she comes back in anger to the prophet. And it was like, I didn't ask for this child. You just decided this was a nice thing to give with me. And at the time, Halo amarti lo teshaleh oti, I told you not to joke with me. She's really mad at him. There's something about being part of the community was so special. And where I was getting at when we were talking about this off mic at some point, over the past week, but one of the special things, and I think it has a lot of implications, spiritual implications, philosophical implications, all sorts of implications. But one of the aspects of this moment in Jewish history, part of the reason why I feel that as scary as it is to be here, it's a privilege at some level to be here at this moment in Jewish history, is because it is this moment of unity. It was a moment where Israeli society was quite fragmented by, this fight over the Supreme Court. And suddenly, like in seconds, all of a sudden, everyone was family. And all of a sudden, no one was refusing to serve. And all of a sudden, there was this palpable sense of unity. And it just feels like, what a privilege to be able to be here for that, to be able to participate in that, to have kids who can volunteer and connect to that. And like everybody, I'm sitting in a cab on my way somewhere, and I remarked on this to the cab driver. I said, the unity out here is really amazing. And he points to his phone. I said, "What's on your phone?" He said, "Look at these WhatsApps." Turns out that the cab driver, just regular guy, he points to his phone, and it turns out that there's a base of Duvdevan, which is the special operations soldiers in Israel, near him. And he and his friends went out, and he's showing me pictures of this barbecue that they cooked up for all 150 soldiers at this Duvdevan base. It was, he says it was 8,000 shekel, and he's and he's going to do this every week, him and his friends, as long as these guys are there. He was so excited to be able to participate. Anyway, I was chatting with him about that, and he also felt what a privilege to be able to to do that. And this is a cab driver. He doesn't have 8,000 shekel when he and his friend. Like, that's a lot of money to spend on this stuff, to spend on it weekly. So I gave him a 250 shekel tip. I said, use it to help buy the grill.
Yeah.
And took a selfie with him and,
Sweet.
wished him the best.
Unity is a big deal. I think it's obviously a big deal in Israel. My parents are Israeli, and my mom would give me calls throughout the year being like, I'm really scared of the civil war. Society was pretty fractured. You have a Achim LaNeshek, right, the Brotherhood in Arms, who was threatening not to show up for service, and they've all showed up for service. And not only did they show up for service, but you have like 2,000 Haredim who are volunteering to be drafted, which is sort of also wild because they had, right, a lot of this is around that part of society not wanting to participate in the army. So just like things that we never would have seen before, which are heartening. And the other side of me is also just like, is this the price we need to pay for unity?
I'll grant you that it shouldn't have to take this for us to sense that kind of unity. But to me, the opportunity to bring your individuality into the unity of the people is a very special thing. One of the first courses I produced in Aleph Beta was this 10 Commandments course. If you haven't seen it, it's called The Hidden Structure of the 10 Commandments. You can find it in our Shavuot section. And one of the sort of takeaways at the end of that is that if you look at the structure of the 10 Commandments, one of the ideas that it points to is respect. This sort of idea that the individual is sacrosanct, that you just can't violate him. But then there's this countervailing force to respect, and it's love. And love and respect are sort of in tension with one another because love is about unity. Love is where the walls of two people sort of can come down between them and they can connect with one another. But the scary thing about love is that when you come together to form a we, whether it's a man and a woman in love or whether it's a community coming together to form a we, the danger is always the possibility of the loss of an I. The I in the sense of, capital I, the letter I, the loss of a sense of self. And that's why respect is important. Respect allows you to preserve the sense of self even as you merge together with somebody else to really form a we. It's that I see being the spirit of the country here, which is that everyone is trying to do what they can. I mean, one of our patron circle members, I got an email from, he has a clothing store in Jerusalem, and he's, his ad is, it's buy one, give one, right? When you buy whatever you buy, that exact same thing gets donated to the people from the South, and that's what he can give. And then there's my social worker relative that can do art therapy. And so that's what she's giving. And it's a chance for just everybody to come together in this in remarkable kind of way. And it's pretty mind-blowing. One of the great sort of myths of American culture or the American ethos is the belief in the rugged individual. To be an American is to believe in the rugged individual, is to believe in the Marlboro Man at some level. And, Imu, to some extent, always, we are two beings at once, to get back to that 10 Commandments idea. We are individuals at one level, and we are members of community. To say anything other is to deny the truth of who he is. It's like a cell in the human body declaring itself, I am a cell, I'm perfectly independent, I've got my nucleus, I got my messenger RNA, I got everything I need. I'm a cell. Well, is that really all who you are? Without recognizing that you're part of an organ, that you're part of a human body, you haven't really told the truth about who you are. But you have to balance community, the way in which I am part of a community to the way in which I'm part of an individual. I think this is where we get tripped up a lot. I think somehow in Western culture, we have skewed towards the idea of individualism a great deal. We tend to really, really emphasize it. And part of it, I think, has to do with the fact that generally life has been pretty good in America. And I sort of suspect that when things are pretty good, that it's almost like the community serves the individual. Why am I happy to live in the United States of America? Well, the United States of America makes it easy for individuals to flourish and to be their best selves. And America is there to support life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, all of these individual values. That's what it's about. But that's when things are good. And somehow when things are bad, when the community finds itself threatened, when America finds itself threatened, when Israel finds itself threatened, suddenly everyone sort of instinctively, in a minute, in a second, intuits themselves as much more part of a community. And that communal identity is very strong. That's why the soldiers will come back, and there was a draft for 200,000 soldiers and 250,000 soldiers showed up because people wanted to volunteer. You interview one of these soldiers, say, are you going to risk your life? Yes, I risk my individual life. Why are you doing that? Because I have this sense that I'm part of a community, and the community really, really matters to me. It's part of the beauty of people coming together, that sense of family that we have as a nation. It's that cab driver who's making the barbecue. It's the philanthropist who takes all of these rooms. It's my daughter who's knitting these little loveys and security blankets for the kids in the South. Yeah, I'm a little individual, but I'm really, really part of this community. And by the way, interestingly, that in Sheva Brachos, isn't it, that is a moment of greatest individual happiness to wedding. Isn't it interesting that the Sheva Brachos proclaim that you're still part of a community? Od Yishama Bari Yehuda, the feelings of rejuvenation of a community and breaking the glass for a communal mourning. We do that stuff to remind ourselves you're never just an individual. You're always part of something larger. And that is something which I think we lose sight of now and then. It makes for a good slogan, we are one, Am Yisrael Chai, but it's something which I can delude myself into thinking is just a fiction, is just this sort of fable, is this song that I sing, but it's nothing more than that. But it's real, right? I think the illusion is that a community is nothing more than the sum total of all the individuals within it. That all we are is a whole bunch of different people. We're more than that. We are that, but we're more than that. We are also a community, which is a single unitary being. Mm-hmm. Sure, there might be a little cell over here that is off in a periphery that can muse in its spare time. But fundamentally, all the cells are called upon for what the community needs to do. Defend itself, bind its wounds, take care of the wounded, and take care of those that are hurt, and to figure out how the community can move forward in the face of that.
I think you're right that there is this sliding scale of individual to collective. And one thing I've noticed in this war over and over again is how things change depending on how you shift perspectives. Like almost like you're at the optometrist office and they like put the lens in front of you and they're like, oh, is this clear now? And is this not clear? Like you can shift the lens so many different times. And what you're doing is one of those lenses. Like as an individual, if we see things purely on the scale of individuals, like the only just thing is to punish just the bad guys and spare all the people who were innocent. And to punish the people who were sort of collaborative in sort of punishment ways, right? Like everybody should get their just measure. And if I were God, that's how I would mete it out. It actually doesn't work that way, and it can't work that way. I wish it could. It can't work that way. So like we need to also recognize there is this thing called individual versus collective. And right now, it's not like Be'eri and a couple of these towns in the south, they had an issue. And so let the people down south figure it out. Let them go and, go into Gaza. That's not what's happening, right? The army is doing that. The army is getting up on their behalf. The people of Israel the Jews are getting up on behalf of those people and saying, no, you didn't attack those guys. You attacked all of us. We are all part of this. And so then you go to war with, not the 2,000 terrorists, not the 20 guys at the top, right? You're going to war with another nation, and that's extremely uncomfortable when you sit as an individual and makes a lot more sense when you sit from the perspective of the collective. So that's helpful. One thing that's also been helpful to me is just like, I don't know, at my shul, there's a meditation group that meets weekly. And it's a beautiful group, and I'm so happy that I have it. But we were, 2 weeks after the horrible events of Shmini Atzeret, and we were just processing And someone was very sensitively saying how difficult this has been for them, how they've been struggling, both feeling very alone in the world and also struggling with the high human cost on the other side. I'm talking about confusion, and a bunch of us were saying how we were confused. And then there was a voice that none of us had ever seen before at the meditation group that sort of like penetrated it all. And this person began by saying that she's not confused at all. She's very clear. And she explained that she's from Israel. She's visiting the community. She's from Efrat. And she's here because there was a simcha, a happy occasion that she flew into the U.S. for. She was considering not even coming, but her kids really insisted that it was important for her to go. And so it was just this very weird shift in the room, because this is an intimate communal space, and somebody not from our community, somebody who was far more connected to the tragic events than we were, was there. And she was saying how she is extremely clear in this moment. She has tremendous moral clarity. She's not doing any hand-wringing. And she said, she's like, look, my heart is barely even mourning our own tragedy, let alone the tragic loss on the other side. My heart can't go there right now, because right now we need to be clear. We need to do what we need to do to protect ourselves, to defend ourselves, to get the resources to the people who don't have the resources. And afterwards, there will be time to mourn, to grieve. And it was interesting because I didn't experience her comments at all as having to do with me. What I mean is, she needs to be clear. She is an Israeli citizen. She's there. She needs to make sure the resources go to the right people. Like, I'm not there. The body of Israel is large. The Jewish people is large. There are many different people in many different circumstances who are called upon, each for their mission in their time. And that's what I keep coming to, is like, you know what? I have the capacity to do some hand-wringing. Let me do some hand-wringing. I have the capacity to have compassion for Gazans. So great. So let that be my job. And I have nothing to say to the people who need to be abundantly clear in this moment to do what they need to do. And maybe that's also part of what you're saying, is I have the luxury of being a little bit more of an individual in this moment. But I just keep noticing how there's so many different lenses to wear. And to some extent, there's achdut in that as well, right? There's a unity in a federation of many different kinds of individuals who each have their particular job and their different feelings in this moment.
When she was talking about what we need to do in moral clarity, I think she was talking about the body of Israel, right now needs to defend itself. Mm-hmm. That's what the body of Israel needs to do. You know, before we talked about how things get muddled even in moments of moral clarity. It's trying to make sense of the craziest thing in human life, the craziest phenomena there is, which is war. The first tablet of the Ten Commandments is Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I'm the Lord your God. And the second, the tablet, the first part is Lo Tirtzach, right? Do not murder. And taking a human life is the number one no-no there in Ben Adam L'Chavero and how I relate to people. And yet war comes along and seems to make a mockery of that. And how do we even make sense of it? Is there a way to make sense of it? Like, am I supposed to completely harden myself to the plight of, you know, the Gazan mother and say to myself, well, she's for sure a supporter, would be dancing in the streets and, rejoicing at the death of, one of my hostages. So I don't have to feel bad.
I've seen many justifications of trying to tie every individual in Gaza to the terrorists and to basically show how there are no innocents, right? Like, I've seen that philosophical bent.
And it just seems to me like that's a fraught path, right? Like, if that's what I need to do to make peace with what's going on. And I just think, like, sometimes a little humility says that you can hold contradictory feelings at the same time. And that's part of what it is to be a human being sometimes in your life, is to be able to embrace contradictory feelings. It was Emerson who said, do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. And, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. There are two ideas here, and somehow both are true. One idea is, there's somebody who got hurt. There was somebody who was killed in Gaza. It's terrible. They've got a wife. They've got kids. It's awful. And I can find compassion in my heart for that. And that is one feeling. And the other feeling is I was attacked. My nation was attacked in a barbaric way and is fighting an existential fight for its ability to live in this neighborhood and continue to exist. And the only way it can prosecute a war is not trying to hurt civilians, but the only way it can prosecute a war is that there will be civilians who die, and it has to defend itself. It has to defend itself is one feeling. I feel terrible for those truly innocent on the other side who suffer is another feeling. At some level, those feelings butt up against each other, and I can embrace both. And I can embrace both. And there may be a time in the future, that is maybe not now, that I could even explain to you exactly how I can embrace both, that I could argue to you in a cognitive way, in a philosophical way, in a way that can make sense. But maybe now isn't the time. Maybe now is the time to say, I can embrace both. I hold multitudes, as Walt Whitman said, even contradictory parts, and it doesn't take away from the justice of the war, the compassion for those who die on the other side, who are innocent, who have lives, who have children, and I can feel for that too.
I appreciate that tremendously, because to me, I'm always looking for clarity. I'm always looking for all contradictions to be resolved so I can know the one right way to think, behave, feel. And, I can pore over these editorials and these papers and those editorials and those papers and weigh all the different opinions and come to some, grand conclusion. But I don't know about you, but nothing has ever felt right. Nothing, no one thing has felt completely right. And so it's almost like in my desire to have clarity, it feels like the best thing I can do is relinquish that desire.
Relinquish that role. Relinquish that role. Right now, you are part of a community that was attacked. And you're a compassionate human being, but the one thing you aren't is the judge and the jury of this community right now. There's still God in heaven, and part of the humility is that God will judge. God will judge the enemy that attacked. God will judge me. And even prosecuting we even prosecute this war against Hamas is not so much because we are the judge of them and we are there to dispense justice. It's not that we were elected judge of the universe. It's that we were attacked for heaven's sake, and we have a right and a duty to protect our own, and therefore we're responding. That's different than the judge of the universe. God is the judge of the universe.
There's two things that you bring to mind that I don't know, just make me think of. But one is, no matter where you go, it seems like too much of one thing is not good, right? If you're too much about peace and love, then when people come and rape and attack and kill innocence, then what role does peace and love have in that moment? And when you're too much about, well, we'll punish the oppressor and we will not have compassion, then you become your oppressor, right? You become the enemy. So you have to be able to somehow hold on to multiple perspectives at the same time. So that's one thing that feels really resonant. And the lack of clarity feels like a part of it. Like you can't have unambiguous clarity when you're holding multiple perspectives, and somehow that just feels better. The second thing that you're bringing to mind is just, and again, sitting here safe in Teaneck, like the invitation to think that you're doing something by judging. I've been having a hard time with that. Like, should my role be to go onto social media and defend the actions of Israel? Like, I don't know, like we're all doing a lot of talking, but one thing that never feels bad is helping.
It's that woman, that kid. Look, if the kidnapped mother can do it, then by God, we can do it, right? And if there's a little part of you that feels guilty because you're not standing up and judging the other guy and
defending
and marching, and all you're doing is helping and packing the duffel bags and putting and buying the headlamps and giving them to the soldiers and taking care of those that they left behind at the home front and baking a meal and showing up in Israel and showing that I'm standing with you. If all you're doing is those things, my daughter knitting the blanket for the little kid with the teddy bear whose daddy's off to war. All you're doing is those things. Nobody can argue with you. You can have all the tortured feelings that you want, but you can't argue with being a part of a community in pain and doing what you can to alleviate it and to bring a smile and to connect.
That's a theme we've been saying podcast after podcast, episode after episode here, is when violence abounds and when people are engaged in just the worst of humanity, then be the best of humanity instead of Vayimalei haaretz Hamas, right? Can we pru revu umilu et haaretz? Can we fill the world with life and kindness?
And like that mother in the supermarket, to take refuge in the nourishing aspects of community to lift you out of the whirlpool of self-involvement. And I think part of the whirlpool of self-involvement, honestly, is, use the word judging. I don't think that it's any of our individual jobs to sit in judgment.
Yeah, no matter how many editorials we read.
No matter how many editorials you read, there is something like, I am a part of a community that was attacked, and I will humbly stand by this community as this community tries to defend itself honorably, prosecuting a war against an entity that is hateful while not targeting individuals that have nothing to do with it, but accepting some of those losses, just as I accept some of my own losses in war. It's a terrible, mind-bending, uncomfortable time. Boy, I'd rather live in a more comfortable time and not having to be weighing this stuff. But my job is to be part of a community and to understand with integrity, emotional integrity and spiritual integrity and physical integrity, and ask yourself, what can I do to respond in a way that is right and good and noble? And that's what I think we're all trying our hardest to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rabbi Fohrman, for engaging in this conversation. And this was a particularly difficult topic. Going into this podcast, I was thinking, I knew we were going to have this conversation, and I was thinking, okay, what could we say? We're not journalists, and we're not ethicists. I don't know that the value we contribute here is by telling other people what to think or feel. Because I was thinking, what am I going to even say that's going to resolve anything? And I think that there is good value in at least being vulnerable enough to expose how we are thinking and what we're struggling with. And if it's resonant, great. And if it's not, feel free to discard. But that's kind of the way in which I would characterize this conversation for anybody. No one should take anything I think we're saying as if it's the prescription. But as always, you managed to find words that I guess arranged in the right order bring some comfort and some sense of wisdom. B'toch ami ani yoshaves. That's I keep thinking about that. I dwell in my people.
Yeah, I'll say amen to that. Imu, thank you for hanging out
Yep.
with me. Until next time, I'll see you.
Bye.
This episode was recorded by Imu Shalev and Rabbi David Fohrman and was edited by Tikva Hecht, Hillary Gutman, and me, Adina Blaustein. We would also like to thank Batya Hefter. Though not named in this episode, she is the Israeli woman who shared her insights at Imu's meditation group.